Both sides suffered from serious intelligence failures during the Battle of Britain. Joseph Beppo Schmid, Hermann Göring's loyal subordinate, routinely distorted data to tell his superior what he wanted to hear, often underestimating British strength. By early September 1940, Albert Kesselring was convinced that the RAF's fighter command had been virtually destroyed. In reality, the British still had around 600 to 700 operational fighters, far from being wiped out. This gross miscalculation completely altered the Luftwaffe's strategy, leading it to underestimate British resilience and overextend itself. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe faced compounding logistical issues. Many airfields in occupied Europe were incomplete or in poor condition. German aircraft such as the Bf-1 Laun and Ju-87 Stocker, effective in earlier campaigns, were now exposed as vulnerable, unlike their British counterparts who could bail out over friendly territory and rejoin the fight within hours. Downed German pilots were permanently lost to the war effort. The Luftwaffe's greatest enemy, however, was not the RAF, it was the English Channel. Pilots like Ulrich Steinhilper described Kanalkrankheit, or channel sickness, a form of psychological and physical exhaustion unique to the stress of crossing that expanse of water. Fear of drowning or freezing to death if shot down caused symptoms like insomnia, diarrhea, weight loss and depression. Some airmen even carried pistols to avoid the terror of a slow death at sea. By late summer 1940, morale among German crews was crumbling. One Luftwaffe medic wrote that unless they were relieved by autumn, their nerves would completely collapse. Despite these strains, by late August the Luftwaffe began to recover some effectiveness, and the casualty ratio between both sides evened out. But on August 24, German bombers accidentally dropped bombs on London. Churchill retaliated the next day by ordering a bombing raid on Berlin. Enraged, Göring shifted strategy entirely, redirecting attacks from RAF airfields to London itself. His hope was to crush British morale and force the RAF into one decisive battle. Instead, the change proved disastrous. By abandoning attacks on airfields, Göring gave the RAF time to repair runways, restore radar systems and rebuild strength. Meanwhile, German fighters, especially the short-range Bf-109s, were stretched to their limits, using most of their fuel simply reaching London and returning. Over the city, they could only fight for 10 minutes before needing to retreat. Göring still demanded that his pilots protect bombers and simultaneously lure out the RAF's last reserves, an impossible task. This new campaign became known as the Blitz, a sustained aerial bombardment of British cities. For the first time, civilians stood on the front lines of modern war, yet instead of breaking British morale, the bombing strengthened it. The Luftwaffe, by contrast, was reaching its breaking point. British aircraft production had surpassed Germany's by more than 1,000 fighters in 1940. Britain also had deeper reserves of spare parts and replacement planes, while the Germans struggled to replace both aircraft and trained pilots. Even though the RAF faced its own shortage of pilots, about a 10% deficit, it was manageable compared to the Luftwaffe's crippling 33% shortfall. On September 15, 1940, the Luftwaffe launched its largest assault yet on London, believing it would finally destroy fighter command and open the way for invasion. Instead, the RAF threw everything into the sky. The number of British fighters that appeared shocked the Germans, proving that the RAF was far from defeated. Luftwaffe bomber pilot Otto Bessler later recalled the despair upon returning to base that night. Some airmen celebrated just to mask their grief, others wept openly. Between mid-September and October 1940, the German Air Force recorded nearly 80 suicide attempts or suicides, a grim reflection of their exhaustion and hopelessness. By late October, daylight raids dwindled, replaced by nighttime bombing runs that would continue through the winter. Hitler quietly postponed the invasion of Britain indefinitely. By 1941, as Germany turned its attention eastward toward the Soviet Union, the Battle of Britain had effectively ended. The Luftwaffe had failed, not only because of British bravery and innovation, but because of flawed leadership, poor intelligence, overconfidence, and the simple truth that it had underestimated the power of endurance over aggression. In the summer of 1940, Nazi Germany unleashed a relentless aerial assault on Britain. Fresh from their triumph over France, the Luftwaffe expected a swift and crushing victory, yet what followed became one of the defining turning points of the Second World War. Against overwhelming odds, Britain refused to yield. What went wrong for the Germans? To find out, we turn to historian Dr. Victoria Taylor, an expert on the Luftwaffe. Standing inside the operations room at the Imperial War Museum, Duxford, the nerve centre of Britain's air defence during the Battle of Britain, she reminds us that this campaign, though often told from an Anglo-centric viewpoint, deserves to be examined through German eyes. Were they truly as invincible as history so often portrays? By July 1940, Nazi Germany had conquered most of Western Europe. France and the Low Countries had fallen within weeks, but Britain stood defiant. Hitler now ordered his air force to destroy the Royal Air Force, seize control of the skies, and clear the path for invasion. The Luftwaffe, emboldened by success, seemed unstoppable, but beneath the victory celebrations, its airmen were exhausted. During the campaign in France, Germany had lost 30% of its bombers, 30% of its dive bombers, and 20% of its prized Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters. Despite these losses, Hermann Göring, the Luftwaffe's commander-in-chief, believed his forces could crush Britain's air defences within weeks. Yet some veterans, recalling their encounters with British Spitfires over Dunkirk, suspected the fight ahead would be far bloodier. Britain, meanwhile, was far from isolated. The Royal Navy was still the largest in the world, ready to destroy any invasion fleet before it reached shore. The RAF possessed a revolutionary air defence network, the Dowding system, linking radar, observers, and communication posts into one coordinated shield. Moreover, Britain could rely on the resources of its vast empire, support from the United States, and pilots from Allied governments in exile. The idea that Britain stood alone was a myth. In truth, it was part of a larger global alliance that made defeat far from certain. But within the Luftwaffe's leadership, dysfunction reigned. Hermann Göring was a flamboyant, erratic commander, still living in the shadow of his First World War glory. He was flanked by two senior officers with clashing styles, Hugo Sperler, cautious and methodical, and Albert Kesselring, bold and impulsive. Their rivalry, combined with Göring's ego, created chaos at the top. Across the Channel, the RAF's fighter command operated under the steady leadership of Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, supported by Air Vice Marshal Keith Park of No. 1 Group, the unit bearing the brunt of German attacks. While internal rivalries existed among Dowding, Park and Trafford Leigh-Mallory of No. 12 Group, they still worked together when Britain's survival depended on it, carefully managing reserves and ensuring the RAF remained battle-ready. The German offensive began on July 2, 1940, targeting shipping convoys in the English Channel. This initial phase, known as the Kanalkrankheit or Channel Battle, is often overlooked, yet it was vital. Over 5 weeks, the Luftwaffe launched some 1,300 sorties, sinking numerous ships and forcing Britain to halt daylight passage through the Dover Strait. It was as much a test of British resolve as a military operation, a prelude to the full-scale assault to come. That next phase began on August 13, 1940. Ardrun-Griff, the Eagle attack. The goal was clear: destroy British airfields, radar stations and aircraft production facilities. But Eagle Day began in chaos. Miscommunication and faulty radio crystals meant that many bombers flew without their fighter escorts, flying straight into deadly RAF resistance. Losses were devastating. Later that afternoon, the Luftwaffe regained some rhythm, striking several key targets, but it was far from the crushing blow Göring had promised. 2 days later came Schwarzer Donnerstag, Black Thursday, marking a devastating reversal for the Germans. Instead of tightening their grip on Britain, their wings were being clipped. The fighting reached its peak on August 18, the hardest day, as hundreds of aircraft clashed over southern England in ferocious, swirling dogfights. Both sides suffered enormous losses. But while the Luftwaffe believed Britain was nearing collapse, the truth was starkly different. The RAF, bloodied but unbroken, was only growing stronger, and the tide of the war was beginning to turn.